On music editors for film and television. And we are joined today by four amazing music editors. Thank you everybody for joining us. First, we have Jolinda Palmer, who's in LA. She has a decade of experience as a music editor. Her credits include Deadwood the Movie, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, The Diary of a Future President, which is on Disney+. And Jolinda is also an experienced sound designer and dialogue editor, an amazing singer, songwriter, and performer. She has received one Primetime Emmy nomination, one Primetime Emmy honor, and two MPSE Golden Reel nominations. Next, we have Poppy Cavanaugh joining us from the UK. She's worked as a musician, music editor, DJ, and audio engineer. She's worked with a wide range of artists, including Ian Brown, Van Morrison, and the Rolling Stones. She was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Leaving Neverland for music editing. Sherry Johansson is in New York City. She's a music editor who's been working in the film and TV industry for nearly 30 years. She won an MPSE Golden Reel Award for Best Music Editor on the film High Fidelity. She's been nominated for three others, Showtime's Billions, Maniac for Netflix, and Bad Education, a nomination she earned just this past week, so congratulations. She will be working on Billions season 5 soon. And then Del Spiva is an LA-based music editor who's been nominated for 2 Emmys for his work on The Defiant Ones and Genius. He has also won an MPSE award and nominated for 5 more. He worked on Coming to America, which released yesterday, and is working on Top Gun Maverick coming out this summer, among a number of other films. Prior to music editing, Del worked as an assistant sound editor for films. And my name is April Tucker. I'm a re-recording mixer in Los Angeles, which means I basically mix at the very end of the film and TV process. I'm also the author of an upcoming book from Routledge about how to get into the audio industry. I used to work as a music editor for about a year, and I also do score mixing for film and TV, so I've had my hand in the music cookie jar from beginning to end. So for today's conversation, we're going to break this into 4 different parts. We're going to talk about what is music editing and what it isn't. The skills that are needed to pursue music editing as a career, how to get work as a music editor, and then we'll save our remaining time for any questions and anything else that comes up. But first, I want to just kind of get a background on everyone in the panel on how you got your start in music editing. So would you tell us briefly about your music background and how you got into music editing? And I don't know if anyone would like to volunteer to go first. And you can just go ahead and unmute. And
I could go. Well, I actually got into music editing. I started out doing sound design primarily for animated series and non-scripted. And I kind of navigated my way through learning sound design first. And then I navigated towards music editing eventually around 2012. And I found that like my music experience, my editorial experience, it was almost like working the same way because I'm working within a library. I know my library very well, and I'm pulling from it and trying to help the scene within those library skills. So whether it's sound design or music that you're working with, I found that you use both the skills very similarly.
So I went to school for film, and I liked film sound, and I didn't even know that there was such a thing as music editing. And then I started working at Sound One in New York City in the Brill building, and I started as a messenger, and I was an apprentice sound editor, an assistant sound editor, and then I worked, when I was an assistant sound editor, there was a music editor that I got along well with, and he hired me as his assistant, and then I was an assistant music editor for 3 years, and that was the way that I got my start in the business. I feel like you always kind of have to start from the bottom in order to make your way, and you find your way too. I didn't even know that it existed, so you guys are all very lucky and fortunate and smart that you know that you have a direction that you want to go towards.
Hey Sherry, I was like you, where I didn't know that there was anything called a music ed when I first started out. Number one, when I was in school, I ended up being told, and they kind of tried to scare us and tell us you're never going to find a job in the music in the film industry, music industry. So you might as well move out of town. And I kind of took it as a challenge. So I was looking 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 months, and I finally got my first job in the industry in the mailroom. And then after that, I kind of found my way around clerical. I had no more to show me the way. So I eventually found my way onto a studio doing clerical work and was able to get into the union as a trainee. And then I became a assistant sound editor for many, many years. And from that, I got a lot of really, really strong contacts with people who worked on, bigger productions. And then I was able to use that to try to get one of the music editors to bring me on as an assistant. And back in those days, it was much easier than it is now. But came as assistant and then his music editor, and here I am.
We're the same
Hi.
person.
I started out as a bass player, a session bass player on the London scene, and I was DJing at the same time. And my friend was doing a recording session at Abbey Road Studios and asked if I wanted to come down. I'd never been before, and it's like a really cool studio, and just to come and check it out. And he was sessioning for a composer called Ilan Eshkeri, and I just fell in love with it as soon as I saw it. And I didn't really understand anything, I didn't know anything, but I kind of harassed Ilan for about 6 to 8 weeks, asking if I could just sit in and try and learn and everything. And eventually I became his assistant, so I was a composer's assistant. And then that's kind of where I started to learn about music editing and meeting music editors and talking to them. And I realized that that was the kind of route I wanted to go down. So I kind of just built up. Anytime there wasn't on a film, there wasn't a music editor present, I would ask if I could go and check out the mix and kind of just build up my knowledge from there. And eventually I was able to actually be a music editor. So.
Cool. So one of the things that came up in a lot of the questions was just kind of basic questions about what a music editor does. And we were even talking before the panel started about how there's even being in the field, there's sometimes confusion about what we actually do as what a music editor does on the job. So I'm going to share a little diagram. Hold on just a second. And my cat Bailey is here. He's probably going to be talking through this. Can you guys see that? Okay, so I basically am comparing the workflow to making cookies. And if anyone wants to join, you can join if you have any comments on this. The idea is that the music editor is kind of there. Do you guys consider it your own department, or do you consider yourself just part of the music department?
I consider it part of music department.
Yeah, I consider it part of the music department.
Okay, so there were some questions about where it fits in with post-production sound. And again, this is for a workflow where the budget is large enough for the project that they could actually hire a music editor. So in that case, the people who are working on post-production sound, so dialogue editors, sound effects mixers, Foley mixers, Foley engineers, ADR mixers, re-recording mixers, that's all post-production sound. Would you guys consider post-production sound separate from music department?
Yes and no.
Yes, right.
It's kind of both because the thing is the music editor is within the sound editing. We're in the motion picture sound editors. We're represented as one of them, along with the sound supervisors and the sound designers and the Foley people and the dialogue editors. So music editing is part of sound editing, but we kind of operate as a different department. We oftentimes come in much sooner than the sound team. And sometimes we stay longer than the sound team, well, except for the mixers. So we have to eventually work with them side by side as a unit, even though we're a separate department. And that's part of our job, is to make sure that we're working with them side by side, because before we were working with the director side by side, we were working with the composer side by side, we were working with the editorial crew side by side. So that's one of our things, is to make sure once we get to the point where we're working with the sound editors, that everything is flowing the way it needs to be, so we with them and be really efficient and work with them at the same time at the same speed.
And one thing I've always considered the music editor as being like the liaison between everybody and the dub stage. And the dub stage is where the final mix actually happens. And so like for me as a re-recording mixer, I would be receiving materials from sound editors. I'd be receiving dialogue, sound effects, Foley. I would be receiving music from the music editor, but that music that they're receiving could come from the composer, from a picture editor, from a music supervisor. And then they're responsible for, basically like the picture and the cookie, they're responsible for putting the dough together, where they have all the ingredients, putting the dough together, handing the dough off to the mix stage. And the mix stage is the one that actually bakes it and says, hey, could we get some more sugar in that? Could we, do this differently? Could you make me a frosting? And then the music editor goes back, manipulates the music to give it back to the dub stage. And sometimes they're there in person doing that. One thing I will add, like as a re-recording mixer or a sound editor, I've never had to go into an edit bay with a picture editor. Whereas, I mean, all of you have, how often or how much are you doing that kind of thing where you're working directly with a picture editor?
I work directly with the picture editor a lot. On Billions, a lot of times they'll give me a whole cut with no music, and I'll just put the music in and kind of
Same. I've actually been hired to help editors as well, like in the early cut stage as well. So
yeah, I usually am on, like, starting Billions soon, but I'm on from the beginning. I would also say on this chart, there will be the music editor, the arrow could go from music editor to composer also, because a lot of times, more times than not, the music editor also will give feedback to the composer as far as how their music's working and what else maybe could be done. Maybe some different instruments could be used. There's a lot of that. Music editors a lot of times act as a producer, like the same duties that a producer would have on a record.
And then one other thing to note on this diagram, and then I'm going to skip over to a different one. So in terms of the composer's line, the composer hires the musician. They're the ones who's basically coordinating with the recording studio. If there's a budget for a recording studio, they're the one who handles usually a score mixer. The score mixer is not necessarily the music editor. I mean, do any of you do score mixing, or are you dedicated music editors when you're brought onto a project?
I do some score editing, and I can help out in the score mixing kind of side, but it'll be more going through orchestra takes and finding the best kind of takes out of that and comping them together.
Cool. Okay, and then here, so this was the when there is a budget to actually hire a music editor and a music supervisor and all these people, which is so everyone on our panel today is kind of working in this workflow. Let's see if I can get to the next page. So then we have, this is more a low budget workflow. So say you are working on a reality TV show, a low budget movie. They typically hire one sound editor who does all of the dialogue, sound effects, and music editing. But in my experience, what the sound editor does in terms of music is basically just cleaning up edits. You might be doing a little bit of creative changing, but it's not like the other role where you might literally be asked, like, hey, find a track that is of this mood, or could you coordinate with the music supervisor to do, to get a track of a song of this type. And you guys feel free to jump in if anything I'm saying sounds inaccurate. But basically it's like the music choices happen by the picture editor, and a lot of times they're just going to a music library where they're selecting tracks. They edit it in. They usually sometimes they just chop things together, send it to the music editor, the sound editor. The sound editor goes, oh man, there's a really bad music edit here because they just took the end and the beginning of the music and they lopped out 30 seconds and they just stuck it together. So they like their end point and their start point, but you got to re-edit so that it sounds like decent in the middle. But basically in those cases, sometimes the composer is acting as their own music editor. There may not be a dedicated person. So basically everything we're talking about today is going to be that first, this first diagram. Or does anyone have anything they want to add about the low budget? Okay, so let me turn that off.
I'm sorry, I did want to say something about this only because I know that there are some people who are trying to become music editors, and one of their ways to do that is to work with a composer on a lower budget project. And if you have, I mean, it's one of those ways. If you know a composer who does low budget, and he always is in a time crunch trying to get things done, what a music editor does. So if you're an up and coming and you want to be a music editor, and if you know a composer like that, you could say, listen, I will do your work, I will do your music editing work, and then in the meantime I'll help you out, free up some of your time, because you probably are doing 5 projects at once, and then I'll work with the director. And sometimes that can be a way in.
Yeah, I was gonna
I know
say
a couple people who.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. You can also have those relationships early on with your composers, and some of them may not use Pro Tools. Maybe they use a different software like Digital Performer or something. But then, your mix requires it to be in Pro Tools format. So they will hire you to just deliver it in the specific format that it needs to be delivered. That's another way you can start working with composers as well.
And then I know I didn't really cover the types of the things that you would actually be doing as a music editor. So let's discuss that a little bit about what are the types of things you would be doing in an average day or an average week or on a film in relation to being a music editor.
Well, I don't know. Where would you start?
Yeah.
First thing I would say is as a music editor, we're anything that's musical that goes into the film or the TV show or whatever the project is. We are its steward. And any music anywhere, it's up to us to make sure that it is represented in the best way possible, and that everybody knows about it, and that it flows well, and that it accentuates picture or it comes back out, and that the director knows what's going on, the composer knows what's going on. So we are the number one steward of music. That is our number one job technically, to make sure the music gets from point A, which could be iTunes, to point B eventually, which is, the final product. And so, but I'd say the answer to your question, I'll just start. What did I do yesterday? A composer sent me some cues. I sunk them up to picture. I conformed it. I adjusted the mix, took out some instruments that made it too heavy, because I understood that the director likes to have things feeling a certain way. In this case, he wanted the score to feel more hip hop. And so every time the composer would bring me these cues, I would make sure that they stayed within the parameter of that the director wanted to hear. Yeah, that was my day yesterday.
Well, I would say typically we would start with spotting an episode where we would watch it all down with the producers and the editors and the composer. And we used to all be there, but now we're zooming in, and we watch it all down. And the music editor either creates, or the composer would create, a template document that has every single cue, how long it is, what it should be, and whatever other notes and that the producer would give. And then the usage, whether it's a main title, a piece of source music, or a score. We start from typing all of that out and watching the whole showdown and typing every note that somebody has, like, this is working or it's not, or this is why it's not working. And we go through the whole show from start to finish. Typically we would have locked picture, but if we don't have locked picture, then we make notes about conforming. And then from that stage, we would, wait for the composer to write and record everything, get it mixed. Usually the composer's mixer delivers me back stems, and then I prep the stage. Meanwhile, I also get the music supervisor's files and then cut those in and prep them as well. And then now we mix virtually too. We're zooming in on the dub stage. So that's weird, but we're all doing it. So that's basically what my life has been like since, I don't know, what is time? Last December, 2 years ago.
Just to add to what you're saying, sometimes with the spotting sessions, I'm brought in before the composer is to do a temp, like a full temp kind of mix. So, well, find a temp for the actual show and work quite closely with the director to find the mood and the right kind of atmosphere of tracks. And then the kind of composer will come in and I guess spot along to, as a guide. The temp is kind of like a guide, and then it's a kind of back and forth kind of conversation between what is working, what's not. So yeah, that's a bit of an earlier process, but that doesn't always happen.
And I would ask, when you're temping, are you usually temping with the director or the producers? Or I mean, sorry,
direct
or the editors?
The editor, I find that editors always love having most of them love having an input in music. So normally I get something from a editor, and then I'll actually sit down with the director, and we kind of go through a kind of more detailed pass, as it is, as like an arc, trying to connect everything together.
I would say in TV, I'm mostly more with the editors versus anyone else. Like, I'm working mostly with them.
Sure.
I want to add to
on TV also, if you have many seasons of a show, you'll have the composer's music from the previous seasons that you can temp with. And then usually, in my experience, you would have a temp, well, you could have a spotting session with the showrunner, the producer, or not have a spotting session, but it's more common to have a spotting session. And another job of a music editor too is there are times that I've worked with composers that are not experienced film composers. They may like a band, a few times this has happened, and they send demos to temp the film with, and then I've had to like basically create a score with the demos that were sent, and then they'll go and record it. I worked on one film, Dan in Real Life, and they actually went to re-record the temp, and Peter, the director, liked it so much that was the final score. So it's fun.
And just to explain temping for anyone who doesn't know. Oh, would anyone like to, or I can?
That's exactly what I was literally about to say. I mean, just so that you understand when people say they need to temp something. So generally, when obviously this may be a rudimentary explanation, but whenever any project is shot, you have a little bit of dialogue, but it's really dry. The picture editor can cut it together, but you can't really tell where they're at. It's got to be screened so that the studio can watch it and say, "Ooh, I think we're going to have a movie." The composer hasn't been. Maybe the composer's not hired yet. Maybe they just started. Maybe the composer's waiting until the director knows what he wants musically. That temp score needs to be there in order for us to show the film to the studio head or to producers or to a studio audience, and it's a temporary musical soundtrack from start to finish in all the places of the film that it needs to be. And as we create this temp track, we discover these things where there should be music, where there shouldn't be music, and then the director and or the picture editor and the composer, there's a bunch of dialogue back and forth as we create this temp track, and it literally becomes a guide. It can become a guide for the composer, because now the composer knows what the director would like in this film and where the director's head is at. Not to say that the composer is going to copy it, but they're going to know where the starts and stops are, and they're going to know the temperature of the music and the emotional content. You know, maybe it needs to be more driving, maybe it needs to be more emotional, maybe it needs to sit back a little bit, maybe it needs to be ethereal, maybe it's got to be in the head, maybe it's got to be pushing and driving and action, and these decisions are made like 5-10 seconds of the film as to what's going to be there musically. And when we start doing that temp track, as Sherry was saying at the very beginning, if there's no music at all, sometimes the picture editor or director's like, we don't know what to do. And then the music editor comes in and so, or they'll bring me in, they'll say, okay, put in music. And then I'll say, okay, not a problem. And then I'll sit there by myself and think, after talking with them and I get started, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And then I start thinking about it, and I start playing things, and I start experimenting, and I start listening, and I listen. I might listen for days, and then I'll put all these musical sounds together, and then I'll start, oh, this is going to be great. And then I start putting these ideas together, and then at some point, got to show them to the director or the picture editor or the composer sometimes. And then they say, yeah, I love this direction. Or maybe you do the whole thing, the whole film, and then they're like, okay, make some adjustments here, make some adjustments there. I like this. Ooh, I really like that drive. Let's put more drive in it all the way across. And then you start adjusting the temp score. And then this happens, it happens all the way through until the composer starts writing. And then as he starts writing, his cues start replacing the temp score. You're still screening. So this whole time you're having the music editor, we have to keep up with the temp soundtrack and the new composer cues coming in, and then the songs, the needle drops that are in, all of that's changing. So we're having to work with the director and the picture editor and the music supervisors sometimes to keep all this stuff going and keep everyone's request up to date as we go through the post-production process all the way into the sound mix. And even then, we're still making all of these decisions, even during the sound mix, until the very, very, very end, and maybe even the last day sometimes. So yeah, it's hard to say exactly what we do. There's so many things, but it's pretty comprehensive, pretty political, and it's very, very creative, and it's very, very technical. And sometimes you wish that you had a psychological degree to deal with the kids that we have to work with in this industry.
There was just a question about making lists, and I'm wondering if there's an easier way to explain this. So when you're temping something, like let's say you're temping a scene, and the director says, "Hey, I want a song that sounds like the Rolling Stones." So you go to your temp library. Would you just be going through yourself, finding what you think works best, and then sending that to them, or would you be sending them options? And how many options would you typically send?
I typically would send anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe. And it depends. If the music supervisor, a lot of times they'll give me a bunch of options, say, hey, cut these a picture, show them, tell me if they like any of these, and I'll cut all of them to picture. But other times you can, if you're using, you can use metadata within your score to find like tempo and duration, and you can even like make your metadata say like different moods, so that you can easily pull your score that way as well.
And then we just had a question about what is a temp library?
Temp
and do you guys build your own?
Yeah, temp library is everything from like your favorite movie soundtrack to all your iTunes. Like temp library can be anything, but basically it's what we're using to get a feel for score or source music. Typically it could be anything.
And do you build your own temp libraries? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sherry.
No, and it just depends what the project is of what your temp library is. So like if you're working on a big feature film, your temp library can be every soundtrack ever that was ever made. If you're working on a television show that's had multiple seasons, your temp library is generally the music from these all the other previous seasons.
Right. Or if sometimes the different studios will have deals with artists, or like you get a music supervisor who has deals with artists to try to place their songs as well. That's more on the music side, like the song side.
Right. Which is not necessarily temp. It's like more trying to find the final music for the project.
And when would you be getting, when would a task go to a music supervisor versus you versus a composer?
The music supervisor typically is in charge of licensing. So they are in charge of getting the song, whatever the song is, they're getting it cleared and getting all of the publishing info, all of that information, the splits, who wrote it, all of that. They get that information, they get it cleared. I don't know how because I don't have that job, but they work their magic and they get back to us with all of that information, and we prep it for the cue sheet as well as the actual files.
Which is a whole other thing, the cue sheet.
Right. We could go on for hours on that.
But I'm wondering too, because I know sometimes, like I know when I was a music editor, there would be times where the music supervisor would be providing me with tracks, and sometimes I wasn't sure, like why did they not come to me, why were they not coming to me to say, hey, could you temp in something that's this style, as opposed to a music editor, or I'm sorry, music supervisor. Someone must have gone to them and said, hey, can you try to get a song that sounds like XYZ, right? They're sending you choices.
Yeah, typically the songs or any, there's also a conflict of interest when composers are writing source music. A lot of times they can't actually do that depending on the deal that they have. But yeah, a lot of times the songs will be any source music, meaning it's, playing in the background of the situation in the scene, or it's a song that's playing like a needle drop, like it's playing as score, but it's a song. That would be the music supervisor's, choice, because they can make the deals. They have pre-clearances as well. They know artists that are up and coming that have pre-release tracks. They have, so it's a lot that goes into it.
I think when it just to bounce off what you're saying, at the kind of beginning stages of putting rushes together and trying to find the language of the music, the directors will just be going straight to the supervisors to kind of bounce ideas off one another. And then as soon as things start getting narrowed down, and directors and showrunners are wanting to see what the music's like to the picture, that's kind of where I kind of more jump in and start doing different edits, seeing what hits, what cut, seeing what's working and what's not working, kind of thing. So it's like a
the beautiful thing of it is beautiful thing of it sometimes is that if you have a really good relationship with the director or the picture editor, and they start talking in their head about things that they want, and then you're like, well, he's talking in their head about things that he wants musically, let's say songs, all of a sudden he's literally wanting you to come out with your ideas. So a music editor, we can easily, some of us are really, really strong at it. Some of us not so good. I'm somewhere in the middle, but sometimes, we can do a lot of this song placement before the music supervisor even gets in. We're working with the director and doing some of that. And sometimes it's so difficult to find exactly what we want. The music supervisor is giving us tons of stuff and we're still not quite hitting it. And then, but we've been listening to the director for maybe months, and we hear what he's been saying and we listen to the picture editor. We've been feeling how the script and the story has been going, and we tap in that because we've been listening to the story and what they want, and something will kick in. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, it needs to be something that's a little bit more grit, you know, not so poppy. It's got to be grittier and or something like that. And then all of a sudden you're coming up with ideas and you're showering the director or the picture editor with your ideas as well. And then at that point, then the music supervisor just, you know, if the director likes it, music supervisor just looks at the price and then fits it into the budget, and then they have to work with that. But a lot of times music editor can spend huge amounts of time looking for songs and placing songs. That's not our primary responsibility. We did more of that back in the day than we do now. But literally, it's almost like we're not special teams, but for any one of these folks, the director's not sure what he wants to do. Picture editor doesn't have, not necessarily not sure. The music supervisor hasn't started yet or isn't involved yet. And there are all these times when you can spend time looking at songs and putting your, not necessarily your stamp on it, but your creative flow can come out on even in songs, you know, almost any time, sometimes very early. But I like that part that we're able to do that and you know, put our creative part into the film.
What I love about our job so much is I feel like we are in the music. Like we're literally inside of it, walking in it, stepping in it. Our hands are in it, our brains are in it, and we're like one with it. And that is like the greatest thing about being a music editor. And that is why it's like the greatest job in the world.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I'm always like dancing in my headphones, I'm always in it. Like really, it's so fun.
Oh yeah,
It,
if I'm in the cutting room and I start, all of a sudden I start yelling. Sometimes it feels like it's like Braveheart and everybody's running down the hill and you're like, yeah. I don't know. It's anyway, that's just maybe I don't know, but you know, you can have those moments, you can have them many times a month where it just feels so incredibly good because you've reached that moment
Yeah,
and
you get
everything's
lost
starting to come
in it.
together.
You
And
get lost in it for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
and
Everything you're saying reminds me, it almost sounds like you are composing, but using other people's music. And you're the one who's kind of placing it, picking where it goes, because you're, you know, a composer in the sense of like, you're having to take this, what they're just telling you as words. And like, I want this feeling, I want this mood, or I want something that sounds like this. And you're having to solve the problem to pick something to go in
Yeah,
there.
also like if we go back to the Temp library, as Sherry was saying, if you have a show that's consecutive seasons, you're on your season 3 or whatever, you've already built a library for season 1 and 2 that the composer has written. So you're going to use those cues. The editors are going to use those cues that have already been written as their temp tracks. And then a lot of times they'll be edited like a little rough or whatever, and your job is to fix it and make it work. And so you're literally going into the original stems that were delivered for the first episode or whatever, and building them to match what you think the editor was trying to go for, and creating your own sort of cue out of the score that was already intended for something else, but building it for this new purpose. So it's a lot more common in shows that are consecutive seasons that you get to do that, and it's fun.
you can make new cues from them
And
that the
too.
editor may not have even done.
So how much of
But you
your,
are
oh,
composing.
I'm wondering how
You
much
are.
of your time, oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was just agreeing with you. Like you are, in a way, you are also composing, and it's our job to make sure that the whole entire soundtrack flows, and one, like it's a handoff of one cue to the next, and thematically, like you need to keep track of the themes for the composer, like it, and it's almost like a crossword puzzle in a way. it's very,
So yeah, and
you're definitely
I'll
using a part of your brain.
expand. Yes, because I would say that you know, what you're saying, Sherry, it's really we're TV, we're, I guess we're showmakers, or we're filmmakers, where we're trying to make a whole piece. It's not always necessarily just this cue or that cue, but it's the whole story, it's the whole script, it's all the characters. And you know, as when you're looking at becoming a music editor, it is as, you know, a filmmaker or a showmaker. And it's not necessarily, even though our first job is technical and we are the technical stewards of this music, you know, it's the whole creative process, the whole project. It's great to be involved in. It's lovely.
How much of your time is spent actually editing? And how much of your time is spent, I mean, I don't know, how would you classify it? Like communicating, dealing with people, say being on a mix stage, being on a scoring stage, like how would you break it down?
Well, I would say I'd spend probably, I would say about 5 days total building an episode of television would be about 30 minutes. I would say I spend about 5 days doing all of it to prep for a mix. But then the mix is usually 2 days where I'm on Zoom on the stage, but not since COVID, from like 9 till 7. And I typically we would have a 2-day mix.
I would say everything's kind of split 25% editing, 25% kind of doing cue sheets, updating, 25% politics, maybe handling the clients, handling the showrunners, and then the actual, maybe another 25% of actual creativity of putting ideas together and showing them. It's all quite equal, I think, at the end of by the end of the project.
It's different for every project too. Like if you're working
Yeah,
on a feature
absolutely.
film, you could spend
Right.
like, and you're doing a
Features
temp, you could
Totally.
spend like a week on one cue.
Yeah,
in
yeah,
your room
it's
alone.
true.
It just depends.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of communicating with people. But every project is completely different. Like I don't even know if you could answer it the same with every project.
Yeah, I was just kind of trying to clarify that even though the title is music editor, you're not spending 100% of your time at a Pro Tools rig editing Pro Tools. There's a lot of other things that you're responsible for. Okay, so I'm going to skip into our next section, which is the skills that are needed to be a music editor. And we had a couple questions asked before, like, do you need to have classical music training? Do you need to read scores?
I would say no. It definitely helps just to have a general knowledge of music, but you don't need to have training. I've worked with a lot of music editors that don't, and it's just like kind of a puzzle. And just because it's good to have that knowledge, it's good to definitely have a fundamental appreciation for music, but it's definitely not a requirement, I would say.
And how often are you guys even sent scores? I would guess never, hardly ever.
I'd I'd say, you know, when we do get to the scoring stage, it's extremely helpful to have a musical background. You know, I was yeah, I majored in music before switching over. I'm a trombonist, but that side and reading music, once you end up hitting the scoring stage, it's you know, like I said, it's not absolutely mandatory, but it's so much more helpful. And when you can talk their talk, and the composer talking to the musicians, and the composer talking to the orchestrator, and composer talking to the conductor, and you know, they get really technical. And at that point, it's really, if you can get through that without understanding everything that they're saying, but if the more it's much more helpful on the scoring stage if you do have a really solid musical background. But I would say, and you're talking about other qualifications, it's not necessary to have a degree. But it's like music. It's not necessarily necessary to agree, but if you do, and if you have more schooling, it turns out that the people that you're working with, a lot of them, they do have that schooling, and sometimes they might. It's. How do I say it? I'm not trying to be snobby or anything like that. Sometimes it's easier to communicate and for them to feel comfortable with you because you're constantly looking for another job. You're constantly looking for the next gig. You want them to be comfortable with you. They want them to be calling on you again. So you want to be closer with them, not sucking up, but I'm just saying, just in general, just being able to communicate. And the more education you have, the people that you're working with that are hiring you have tons of education, um, especially in film. So I'd say it's only helpful the more education you have.
You should definitely know Pro Tools going in for sure. And I think that you need to have an intuitive sense. It's something that not everybody has, but it's kind of impossible to do this job if you don't have a sense of intuition and music working with picture. But it's hard to explain exactly what I'm saying. But with that said, you also I grew up dancing, so I have like a very strong dance background. And then once I was an assistant music editor, that's when I learned to read music. And so you could start without knowing that skill, but then that skill definitely helps. And you need to be a good communicator to be in this job. That's a huge part of the skill set that you should have.
In terms of music production skills, like, do you need to know MIDI? Do you need to know how to record? Like, is any of that relevant?
I would say that's
always
more for composing, but it's a plus.
But you don't need
Yeah,
that.
it's very helpful because that's another thing about just interfacing and talking with your colleagues is if you know things like that, they're more cool with you working with them the more if you know more. But even though you may not, you could use MIDI as we work. Since I've used to use a lot of MIDI, but not as much now. But you don't have to know MIDI. You don't have to know how to record because right now, at least on the larger projects, they usually have specific people that they have to man the record machine and to be engineers, and it's usually not us. If sometimes it can be, and sometimes it can be helpful, but it's not mandatory.
Is there anything you can do to prepare to learn like people skills or what are the soft skills that could be helpful to somebody?
I would
trying to
say
get into-
definitely right now brushing up on telecommunication skills in general, because we don't really know where everything is headed. But for now, a lot of it has been virtual, and just knowing how to navigate that is very essential.
And what about music communication? And I'll use this example. So for me, when I'm doing sound design, and a producer says to me, "This doesn't quite sound right," I don't really have a language that I can use to talk to them about. Um, I don't. There's no. It's kind of just a hit or miss game of like, okay, well, let me try this thing and see if you like it. Do you want something darker or cooler? But like with music, I find that really helps give a framework for the language. That even if they don't completely understand it, that if a producer says, this sounds too dark to me, that
Yeah, I
you
find
can
just getting them to describe what their feelings are, even if they don't have the dialect for it, just having them describe what their feelings are based on the cue or the scene, that helps. Even if like I have a classical music training or whatever, I could say a bunch of jargon that they wouldn't understand and it would be weird. So like just getting them to express how they're feeling about it helps me get a sense of, okay, maybe I should get rid of that flute. It's too happy or whatever, you know?
I know sometimes we have to, there are barriers of communication. You know, sometimes the director has no ability at all to talk musically. He it's in his head. But sometimes you have to learn how to decipher that. We're almost like the communicator, the translator off between the composer who thinks musically and you know, chords and fifths and octaves, and then the director's like, oh, that's sad, and that's too bright, or that's too. So you have to be the translator between all these people. That is one of our jobs, is to be able to make sure that everyone's on the same page and can communicate with each other, and there's no blockage. If there's a blockage of communication, it's on to make sure that the communication gets across.
That's 90% of our job right there.
Can you all think of any other skills that might be important for someone that's interested in getting into music editing?
I would say definitely doing as much as you can, side projects, gaining your experience up, getting your Pro Tools abilities up, all of that, like getting your union hours, trying to just get as much experience as you can, because once you get that job, you need to be ready.
I think working under pressure as well and keeping calm under pressure is a good skill to have. Sometimes in the dub, someone showrunner just doesn't like a cue, and you've got a really short space of time to audition different ideas. So I think being calm in that and being able to think logically in those kind of situations is really helpful.
So I think we're going to move into our next section, which is how to get into music editing. And we actually had a question about what are union hours. And without getting too deep into the union stuff, would someone like to tackle maybe this challenge of getting into music editing and the union?
So convoluted. Okay. Yeah, well, I would say if in order to work on network television or films or feature films, you need to join the union, which for us, it's Local 700 Motion Picture Editors Guild. There's 2 offices, East Coast, West Coast, LA and New York. And in order to get in as a music editor, you need to qualify. And in order to qualify, you need, I think it's 175 days, right, of union, of experience that would qualify you. That's, you know, non-union hours, but that would also count towards this experience.
But they have to be paid.
Right, they have to be paid, and you have to have proof of those hours with either pay stubs or invoices or whatever. And then you also, I think you need a letter of recommendation, and then you need to pay the fee, which is, I don't even know how much right now.
And I just double checked, it is 175 days. And one thing about joining the union is you don't necessarily have to have those hours as a music editor to get into the union. I actually joined the union as a mixer.
Right.
And then was able to work as a music editor.
Over, yeah.
Yeah, but like you could even be doing non-union sound editing work. I could work for a sound house full time.
Right. And those hours would definitely qualify.
I know a producer he was just a producer, a music producer, and he used those hours to get into.
And so basically, again, that's just to get into the really high profile stuff, but that tends to be where you see the music editor as a specialized role, as opposed to the music editing happening alongside other things. Okay, yes. Yeah, so let's just do it this way. If you were someone who was, oh, go ahead.
I have one more thing, because I know that there's like or it's a company of music editors called Formosa Music, and there are other companies of music editors around town. They don't come off my head right now, but there's
Yeah, there's
several
boutiques as
PV
well.
organizations.
And
Yeah,
and you can start there too.
yeah, that's right. You can start there, and there's a lot of opportunities. And it's harder. Sometimes it's harder to get a lot of really strong experience at these places, but you can get in, and eventually you can. That's the whole thing, is getting in, and spending the extra time. I had mentioned earlier, I think, that I was working 8 hours a day. Um, at some point, even what I was having to do is learn Pro Tools. So I would learn Pro Tools after my shift at 7. I'd say from 7 to midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning every day, trying to learn Pro Tools, because your skill set, especially your technical skill set, is really, really important at the early stages. And a lot of times, if people don't think that they can rely on you creatively because you're new, they can rely on you technically. So the more technical you are, the more you have to offer, including the creative, when you're first starting out. So Pro Tools, Pro Tools, Pro Tools.
The problem now, though, is the fact that it's rare for music editors to get assistants. So sometimes you can, maybe if you would try to get a job as a post PA on a show or a film, because now they have those, and specifically kind of shadow the music editor. And that might be one way to go. And I think companies now are starting to offer diversity opportunities. So it might be possible for us to hire assistants, because it's a real problem. Because I know I started as an assistant, Dell, you started as an assistant. And that's how you learn, is by being an assistant. If you can catch an internship, again, it's a lot of the studios now don't want to hire interns because of um, confidentiality. But if you can find an internship, also, that's a great way to get in.
I don't want to, maybe I'm talking too much, but I just want to make sure that the idea of people are not going to necessarily show you what to do. You have to always constantly show initiative and tenacity and helpfulness, where if you talk to someone, or even you get a mentor, which is a great way too, because a mentor might help you show way and give you contacts and things like that. You always have to be constantly showing them that you are going after it. If they get the feeling that you're being complacent and waiting on someone to show you or tell you things, then at that point, then you're going to be underwater. Just always be pushing, always be aggressive and assertive in your knowledge, your technical acumen, learning people, the places, and learning the even the directors and the composers, and constantly searching them out, and learning their work, and getting to know them. And
Poppy, did you have something you were going to add? I noticed earlier you were trying to jump in, or oh, you're muted.
No, don't worry about it. I forgot.
Okay, so let me see. Do you think? Okay, so then for someone getting started today, and especially during COVID, like you can't really go. It'll be really hard to be an assistant, really hard to find an internship. What would it take for someone, like say someone who's working on their own and they're taking on their own projects, they're meeting composers, they're just trying to meet music editors, meet composers, they're doing the networking thing. What would make someone stand out to you that you would want to help them? And in what way would you be able to help them?
I would say definitely someone who's self-motivated. Because one thing that I I mean, it's all about if you're starting out and you're an assistant, well, how do you be a good assistant? You're anticipating needs. You're one step ahead of everybody. You know everybody's role on the post crew and you know what their job is. You have an understanding of their job and a respect for it so that you know how to anticipate those needs. And what you can do is research. Right now, we have our computers. You can research all about the post-production process and even just watching things, you know, get your music sensibility like good. I don't know how to describe that, but like getting used to hearing what music is doing in a scene, why you like it, what you maybe don't like about it. And yeah, I mean, that's the best thing you can do right now is try to build up your own sensibilities while you can, because I mean, I have a feeling it's going to be more work than anyone can handle, and they're going to need to hire a bunch of people, and everyone's going to have to be ready. So that's what I think everyone can do right now is brush up on their Pro Tools, brush up on their music sensibilities for film or TV, and yeah, just trying to take on as many student projects or, you know, type of independent things that you can get your experience, you know, up to speed.
Can you?
Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out.
Oh no, that's okay. Who typically is hiring you? Is it the production? Is it the composer?
For
Is it a
me,
company?
it's actually, it could depend. I do have an agent that actually doesn't really get me gigs. I get the gigs, but I bring them to her and she helps negotiate a better deal for me. But I've gotten gigs because my composer says, hey, I really like working with you. You bring a great vibe to this whole process. I love like not having to be so stressed out all the time. Like I've had composers say, I want to bring you with me. I've also had producers say, I want to bring you with me. So it just depends, like just having those relationships and maintaining them.
I get a lot of work from post supervisors who I've worked with in the past as well, and composers as well from coming on a project, working really well with them, keeping in contact, and getting brought on onto the next project. So yeah.
And directors too. It's all like, it's pretty much all of the above. Directors, producers, composers, post supers. It's all about communication, staying in touch.
Yeah, I've also had
Social,
producers say like, oh, I want to hire you, but the music editor already has somebody, or I mean, sorry, the composer already has somebody. Like there's also that too. It's, you know.
Do any of you have relationships with people who you started earlier in your career doing music editing for them, and now they're doing like really bigger projects than when you first met them?
You mean
Oh yeah,
composer
so
or?
Anything. Like I'm just trying to show like that basically you could start with somebody doing a small project and over time it could grow into something a lot
Oh
bigger.
yeah, definitely.
I'm still my old boss's music editor. We just did David Attenborough 6-part show, and
Cool.
I'm still working with him 6 years later. So that's pretty cool, I think.
And do you think age
yeah,
matters? Go ahead, Del. Sorry.
like I said, my first assistant music editor job back then, I think I was mentioning, yeah, he was a music editor, and then he got a job as a composer and was on this Ridley Scott film. He said, Del, do you want to be the music editor? So I wouldn't, sometimes working with composers, a lot of us music editors think when you work with a composer, that's like a plum job, because the composer's always looking for work and you just sit and wait for him, and then you're part of his team. is great. I mean, I love doing temp score too, so I like to do both. Um, but yeah, everyone can everyone, any of them, you know, sometimes you might have worked with someone and then 10 years later, you didn't remember who the person was. And they're like, remember that one time I worked with you and everything changed, everything got better. But also too, sometimes it needs 4 or 5 referrals to get one job. But and I think it was Sherry was saying there's going to be so much work now with Netflix and Apple Films and
Yeah.
Amazon, and the studios are still trying to do their thing. So there's going to be plenty of work, I think, for most people that want to get in, as long as what Jolinda says, you know, you show that that self-motivation, constant self-motivation, and you're going to be fine.
And don't be afraid to reach out to people that you've met, and don't be afraid to like stay in touch and keep bugging them, because this is how we all got in, is by being persistent. Like that's the key word. You have to just be persistent. Nobody's going to get annoyed by you. We all did the same thing, and everybody's in the same boat, and it's how we all find jobs. It's totally fine. And if you're persistent enough, you may just be calling somebody or texting somebody at a time that somebody was like, oh, this person was just looking for a music editor, you just called, I'll give them your number, that's great. That's the key.
Yeah, I've one of one of my colleagues that I started out with, she was the assistant at a music editing house, and she left. I became the new assistant, but we are still friends. And she got an Emmy last year, so like I've seen her completely grow in this field and start her own career. So yeah, you can definitely do it. You just have to not give up.
I'll add, I know some of my scoring work and music editing work comes from a friend of mine that I met in college. He was paying me in pizza and beer. Now he's like, do you want to go to China? Do you want to go to Canada? And I'll give you some pizza and beer too. There was a question I wanted to I'll just address it myself, because it was about getting into music editing as someone who's older. I pivoted, you know, I had an opportunity. I think I was 34 years old. I don't think age really matters, especially if you have the skills and if you have a good opportunity and you can take it, just go for it. It seems like it's a lot more about the network, having a pool of people who could potentially hire you as a music editor, no matter what you're doing for work.
I was in my early 30s.
Oh, wow. Okay. And do you think that you have to live in a major city known for entertainment to be able to do this level of music editing?
This one, I feel like this one is tough, because I do feel that as far as post is concerned, all of the union mixing is done in LA or New York for the most part. So I feel like if you do want to eventually get here, you kind of need to be in one of those cities. But with COVID now, who knows? Who knows?
I have a couple of shows that I'm at some point will be doing, and they said they're going to be posting and mixing in Toronto. So it might be branching out. I don't know if it's because of COVID. And then it's harder to do that here in LA, but it's easier to do it in Toronto because it's not crazy like it is here. But yeah, I mean, it's not like you can just move to London and work there.
Right.
But yeah, I'd say COVID is easing, and it's better to be here. You have to go to a meeting, you have to show up on the stage and do something, and it's you got to be here, or at least have access to being here, especially if you're first starting.
And do you have much? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, London's the kind of post hub in the UK. So I know some music editors that live elsewhere in the country, but a lot of them all do tend to travel down to the studios or to Soho, where there's a lot of post houses. So I think it's quite hard to actually be a music editor anywhere else in the UK.
Fun fact too, in New York, there really aren't a lot of music editors, so we need more. just saying.
And can you explain why a music editor needs to be on the mix stage?
We're there basically so that the composer doesn't have to be there. I mean, we're basically making sure that all of the score and music songs that were intended to be are being mixed properly with the right intent. You know, that's why we're there, and it's an important part of our job. You know, it's I kind of miss being in the dub stage. I miss hearing it. Like, I have to listen on headphones now.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's harder, definitely.
Yeah.
Thing
I
is, if
think
you
dubbing
can,
stage is where. Oh,
oh, go ahead, Poppy.
oh, I was just gonna say the dubbing stage is where everything kind of comes together. So it's a really good time to hear what everyone's work essentially, and then you can make the key decisions in this final mix process of is the effects favored in this moment, is the music favored in this moment, the extra dialogue that's all been put in, how does the music work in relation to that. It's those kind of final decisions that get made that it's good to have a music editor present.
If you're starting at the very beginning and the very first temp, and then now you're at the very end of the process in the mix stage, your breadth of knowledge of the film is pretty good, and you're gonna only make the film better by being there in the mix and
Yeah, your
participating.
knowledge is better than the mixers at that point.
I was actually going to add that. So like I remember as working on a pilot where I probably recut the same music track 50 plus times. And then another scene that was just a really problematic scene between the composer and the director. So when we got to the dub stage, the re-recorded mixer, they have zero context on any of that history. And they don't know that when the producer comes in for review, they're going to be like looking at that moment under a fine tooth comb, because we literally just spent a month talking about it. But the mixer has no idea, you know, they've literally just received all this material.
And they weren't in spotting, you know, they didn't talk about it like we all were there. So
yeah, that was actually one of the most interesting
also,
parts for me, going from being a mixer and also being a music editor, was understanding kind of what happened was going on behind the scenes. Because you just don't see that as a mixer, as an editor even.
I also try to have my mixers backs too, because I try to watch them and know what they're doing so that I can know that they're not going down a wrong path, or like, so I can know that they're on the same page. And I always try to have their backs because, you know, they don't have all the information like we do.
Yeah, and the thing is you're on the mix stage too. We're all part of a team, and we've got the mixers back. Hopefully, the mixers have our back. We have the directors back because we know they're soft and really tender issues that the director has about certain things, music, maybe even sound effects, and we know that because we spent so much more time with the director. Oftentimes than the mixer, like we were saying, or the sound effects people. And I'm not saying we're above them. I'm just saying that we can help them. We can move further along as a team. We have we have everyone's back at that point, and we're just trying. We're going to make the process better and more effective, and make the movie work better with us being there on the stage for sure.
Yeah, there's an interesting technical question asked about the plugins that you rely on, but how often are you actually doing any sort of processing to the music versus just editing?
For me, I'm using pitch and time. I'll use pitch and time, or like Serato pitch and time, or isotope noise reduction. But for me, that's kind of all I'm doing. Sometimes I have to EQ something, or sometimes put a reverb, but I don't deliver that stuff to the stage because that's the mixer's job.
I sometimes record my reverbs and delays and then mute them in case the mixer wants to just hear how the director or the showrunner's been hearing it throughout the process. So I try and help them out in that way.
Yeah, Pitch and Time is one of my favorites just because it's so fast. And I use Altiverb and I'm forgetting the EQs I'm using, but Low Ender, um, MX 4000. It's like a dynamics. It's a simple dynamics plugin. Oftentimes I'll have those. Sometimes I'll have those on the stage if I know that the stage can bring them in. Um, if there's a really tight schedule on the mix stage, I'm trying to have the mixers back and have as much prepared for him so that he doesn't have to go back and redo everything, but he can if he wants to. So I like to have both ways so he can use the raw as it is, or he can use, oftentimes it's what the director's been listening to for months and months is what had happened in my room, who knows, months ago. So I want to have it both. I know he can do a better job. The mixer, lately it's been more she's. They do a better job than me on the mix stage than I could have done in my cutting room. So I'd much rather have them do it if they have the time.
It's the same. I use Pitch and Time, sometimes speakerphone too, if it's a very effective, but it's the same thing. I'll bring it speakerphone, audio suite, and then the mixer can do it, but he has it if he wants. Altiverb and Pitch and Time is really the best. And then there's another good reverb. Revibe is good too for reverb. And Isotope, but I haven't used that one yet, but I have it. I just got it.
Are you ever asked for a show reel or demos, or why do people not do demos in music editing?
We could just tell them to go watch the movie that we worked on or the show. But
Like,
I don't
who
ever
has
do
the
a demo.
time?
Yeah.
I've never done a demo or anything.
So actually, so this is a good question. So let's say that somebody was just getting started and they have been working as a sound editor where they're trying to get into music editing. What would they be sending? Like, what would be the best way to get through to, say, even one of you to potentially ask for help for? Well, actually, would they ask you for work, or would you prefer someone comes and just asks you a question?
I mean, I'm always happy to answer questions. Like, I usually get hit up every week or so about various questions, and I'm always happy to answer them because there really is no information for people wanting to get in, and there's no path for them. There's no clear path for them. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be where I am without my mentors that helped me along the way. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions.
I did actually have an assistant last year over 3 projects. I think up enough of a kind of assistant music editor credit that he's been able to go and do his own thing now. But the only way I kind of got into it was by talking a lot, getting in contact with a lot of different music editors, and just kind of get in contact with them basically every 6 months just to try and connect and see if there was anything they could pass down that they couldn't do, or stand in for if they had to jump onto another project and needed help finishing off on something. That was a really helpful thing to kind of get into, to kind of be a standby for a music editor on their project. It was quite helpful.
Yeah, as you mentioned that, now you remind me, Poppy, there is kind of at least in film here in LA, there's almost an underworld of some people that are so busy that they have an assistant that they pay on their own just to do, as you're saying, just to keep them going. Sometimes if they have jobs overlapping or if they have a bunch of TV shows, and there's a few people out there that are doing that. It's harder to do that and then come out and be a music editor because nobody sees you doing any of the work, but you can learn a lot by doing that. And I don't know how people find those gigs. Asking around, I don't know. I don't know how they find them, but there are people out there that have been doing it for years.
Do you think it's bad etiquette for someone who's just getting started if they were to email one of you and say, hi, I'm looking for work? What would you think of someone approaching you that way? Or I want to work for you?
I mean, the difficulty is for me as a union music editor, I technically can't hire anyone to work on anything that is union material. So if I were to hire someone, I would have to have non-union work for them, which I don't. So it's kind of, they have us in this weird position. We're kind of stuck like doing everything ourselves, which
Yeah.
is hard. We can't, yeah. I don't know how to, I always get asked this question and I'm always like, I don't know, join the union first. I don't know. It's so hard. It's so hard.
I think getting like, I mean, I would be happy to speak to anybody. I can't necessarily, it's the same thing. I can't necessarily offer a job, but we can give advice. And there are places you can join to network. You could also try and get a job. Like I started as a messenger at a studio, and then I met all the editors at the studio and schmoozed and talked and became friends with them. And then that's how I found, an apprentice job and then an assistant job. So it's like starting at a studio, at a post house. I know it's hard now with COVID. And like I said before, post PA, people are hiring post PAs on shows.
I will
And
say also the recordist position, it seems like there's a lot of recordist positions that are opening up.
Yeah. I was a messenger and then I worked in the machine room, which is that recordist. And
Sorry, yeah, mix tech, isn't it? That it's called mix tech.
I think
now, I think.
Oh, is it? I don't know. But they don't have machine rooms anymore. These were like with big dumpers. Like
right. And now, yeah, basically the mixed tech is who used to work in the machine room.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
I'm like really old school. Yeah. Like.
And I'm asking this question because this is actually something I've asked that's come up from my book across any area of the audio industry, which is basically that if you ask someone for work, you might get a sorry, no, and that's the end of the conversation. Whereas if you approach somebody with a question or like, hey, I heard you, congratulations on your nomination, or I really thought it was cool what you did in this project. Could I ask you some questions about it? That you're starting to build a relationship that over years, that maybe 6 months from now, one of you might hear of an opportunity and be like, oh yeah, this person's been emailing me, or I met them for coffee. Like that's how it's positioning yourself to be like ready for when an opportunity comes along.
Yeah. To be just
meeting
friendly,
up for coffee's good. That's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, just
I always say yes.
just mostly picking people's brains, like figuring out how did you get here, what were your steps, that's always a good thing to do with any field that you're interested in.
If you feel, again, I hate to beat a dead horse, but if you have these conversations with these people and they hear that you are driven and that there's nothing you won't do, and then someone else said, it's like, we never get tired of you checking in with us, because sometimes people were like, well, let's see if they check in again. Let's see if they check in again. Let's see if they again, maybe 2 years later. And then that fourth time, 2 years later, they're like, oh, this guy is really persistent. How can I not? He's got my heart. I gotta help him. 2 years, 10 phone calls. They're gonna help you. They're gonna help you.
That reminds me of how I even got my first job as a messenger at Sound One. I was from Philadelphia and I went to New York City just to go to the studio to look for a job. And I met the studio manager, and he's like this real New York guy. And he's like, listen, if you really want a job as a messenger, you got to just bug me. I'm like, okay. So I went back to Philly. I called him 3 days in a row. And then I called him on the fourth day. He's like, all right already. You can start tomorrow. I'm like, okay, thanks. It's persistence. That's it. That's a key word again. Anything you guys want to do, you can do in this world. It's a fact. You just have to do it. and be driven to do it and be nice.
Yeah, I would also say just being easy to work with. You'll get many gigs just because of that. Just being easy to work with is huge.
So what would you tell people who feel like they don't, like there's a comment that, you know, I struggle to reach out to people thinking that I'm bothering them. Do you feel like someone's bothering you if they're asking you a question?
You know, I will say
I don't know
this,
that.
it's probably in your own head because I mean, we're always like that in our own worst critic, but I mean, I get emails all the time from this one music library, from this lady there, and she emails me all the time for years. Okay, she's emailed me like, hey, just checking in, what are you working on, can I help with anything? And you know what, most of the time I don't email her back, but every now and then I am working on something and I'm like, hey, actually, I have this show. It's just starting out. Can you find anything? And like, I've worked with her now for almost a decade, but do I talk to her every week? No, but I actually keep working with her and I never get sick of those emails because I'm like, oh, there she is again. Oh, maybe I'll have, and then I'm like, oh, actually I do. So I feel like persistence is key. Just don't give up. You're not annoying anybody.
And even sometimes when people don't get back to you, you know, sometimes music editing is sometimes it's a war. And I hate using those metaphors, but I don't know what else. Sometimes we are so hard pressed to keep up with the flow of what we're doing because we want to be complete, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of hours. It's not an 8 to 5, you know. Oftentimes too, every time we stop to do something, it's like, okay, well, is that going to delay me and I'm going to leave and stop working at 12:15 or a.m. or 2:30 in the morning, or is it going to be 3 a.m.? So every time you stop, sometimes you think, okay, so don't think that just because they don't get back to you, it's because they don't want to get back to you. Sometimes they're just really busy, and that's where the
Yeah, like
persistence comes in.
just busyness. And then a lot of times you miss things, like whatever. It's not personal.
I had a friend tell me that in LA, there's two states of being. There's too much work and needing work.
Right.
So it's just a matter of catching someone when they're in the right window.
Right. Feast or famine.
Does anyone have anything else they want to add about how to get into this, or is it okay if I just jump into some random questions we had?
In New York, there's
Oh, I did also want to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Sherry.
well, I was just saying, in New York, there's the New York Post Alliance, which is, and I don't know if LA has something similar. You have to be in the business and have a certain number of credits to get into it, but it's a really good networking, and they do take interns there too. But it's a really great networking opportunity because they have like Cinco de Mayo parties and they have Oktoberfest, and then they have meetings every other month where they talk about projects that are going on and what jobs in post-production are needed. And they have podcasts. So if there's groups like that where you can join, those are like the best tools. Also, IMDb Pro has tools too, like where they let you know what's going on. They give you numbers of people to contact. Production offices won't help out so much, but just finding out post supervisors is a really good key. Just meeting post supervisors, and in addition to music editors.
I was going to say
in
that.
the UK, we have something. Oh, sorry, Del. Go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead, Poppy.
I was just saying, similarly, in the UK, we have BAFTA Crew, which is a kind of collective for kind of up and coming directors, producers, post supers, like everything. And really just meet people that are kind of going up with you, so you can start making relationships quite early on in your career. I'm actually part of it this year. It's actually great. It's actually really nice just to meet loads of different people from the film industry as a whole.
I do know that also some music supervisors might, although it might sometimes be non-union, but you're working with a music supervisor and you're working with television or film. And sometimes they want to have someone who could do some music editing and cut a bunch of songs so they could see what it looks like, or, maybe even send it to the production to the filmmakers. So I've known of people times that they got their start working with music supervisors as a music supervisor's personal music editor almost. And so don't discount that. Add that to your list of possibilities when you're really, really looking, and it's, you're drawing blanks.
Are there any good Facebook groups that you'll find really professional level music editors?
There is one. I can't remember the name of it right now because I haven't been on there in like a year. But there's an LA one.
There is an organization called MXC, MXC, Music Editors Collective. It's not necessarily based out of LA, but it's it started kind of in LA, but it's encompassing people from the UK, Australia, New York, Los Angeles. But it's one of those, it's an invitation only sort of a thing where you have to have a lot of credit, and everybody, they vote on you to get in. But every once in a long while, they'll have like a meet and greet for up and coming music editors. So next time that does happen, I'll make sure that the group, you guys know. And it could be helpful because it's a lot of, really, very successful music editors in that group too.
Also MPSC, right? Like
MXC, Music Editors Collective.
And MPSC is music, motion picture sound editors, and they're the ones who do the Golden Reel Awards. Okay, so I'm gonna jump around to a bunch of these questions and we can see if we can try how many of these we can hit. So for someone looking to develop skills, are there practical things they can be practicing? Like, could you practice temping music, conforming music to a certain time?
I would say definitely get used to knowing your library, building your library, and knowing it like in and out. Because you could spend 2 days pulling music without even cutting anything. Like, you need to know your library so that you can minimize that time.
Yeah, I've
Being on
spent.
Pro Tools as much.
Go ahead, Poppy.
No,
Poppy?
sorry. We keep talking at the same time. Pro Tools, I would just say keep working on Pro Tools. That's kind of a key. The faster and more efficient you can get on Pro Tools, it's just going to save your life so many times.
I was going to say, I was convinced that I could be a music editor when I first started just temping. I just took, some footage. Really, it's almost like as long as you can get something on your Pro Tools, it doesn't matter whatever it is, and just take all the sound out and then just start putting temp music to it. Just, if you have to, just down. I'd hate to say it. Not buying from iTunes if you have to, or get a hold of scores. You can listen to them, download them, bring them into Pro Tools, play with them, because that's just what we do. And but that was the first time I knew for sure. I was like, okay, I know I can do this, because I spent like 2 weeks literally putting temp score to, I think it was Pearl Harbor or something like that. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I can do this.
Are you concerned about license at all within your temp library, or is it more just about having variety?
I mean, the temp is just that temp. Like, you don't have to license anything. That's the point of it. You can just kind of go for like, anything is good. Let's see what lands, that's usually the approach with temp, at least.
Do you have any suggestions for organizing or making your temp library searchable?
Some people use SoundMiner. I don't know if any of you guys do. Some people use like SoundMiner or programs like that that incorporate the metadata so that you could search within the metadata and look for duration or tempo or mood or other keywords that you can search. And yeah, and disco too. Yeah, I just saw disco is great. I use that all the time too.
Sometimes it's used. I'll be like, okay, I'm working on a film. I'm just, let's say, trying to think of a good example, but let's say Coming to America, and I'm trying to put some temp music to it. So I'm going to look at other similar comedies that might have a little bit of an urban edge. No, let's see. Then you start going through IMDb, or you start going through your head. It's like, what other comedies would have music that would sound like Coming to America? So then all of a sudden you start looking, and you're going through, you start searching, and you start amassing them together, and then you start listening through all of them, and then you start going. I mean, it's one step at a time.
That's what I do too. I'll go based on whatever
that's
project is.
That's how I work. Yeah, I
And
just
Spotify.
kind of, Spotify playlist is a big thing I like to do, and then I kind of figure out the key ones, and then I'll get the kind of iTunes versions and start putting those to picture.
Do you keep it organized by mood at all, or by type of music, or how do you categorize it within your own?
I
temp
have
library?
mine categorized by composer name, which probably isn't the best because it's very hard to navigate through. But yeah, I don't know. I think everyone has their own method, sort of as long as it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it works for you.
I'll do like action, tension, romantic, emotional, and like hits. I'll have a hits folder for helping.
I'd say go ahead, Sherry. I think Poppy's frozen for a second. Oh, now she's back.
Sorry, bad internet. Yeah, that was it. I think. I hope you got that. I'm not sure.
I think we did. Yeah. Also, like for a show, I'll do it based on character, and like the characters and the like specific themes of the character or two characters. If on Billions, it's like X and Chuck, or that's kind of how I do it also, along with the action and whatever. Again, it varies on project of what kind of classification you need.
Let's see. Okay, we had a question about. Do you ever take unsolicited music? Like if some musician were to contact you and say, "Hey, could you put this music in your temp library?" Would you accept it?
I mean, I could accept it for my temp, but that's about it. Like, I'm not allowed to really do that. Again, it's like a conflict of interest between me and the music supervisor. Like, I wouldn't want to step on their toes if they have people that they're trying to promote. It's better for the musicians, and a lot of them are confused about this. It's better for them to hit up the music supervision and the music library companies instead of us. But I get those emails. I get 10 of them a day.
It needs to be more targeted. So if someone solicits us, I'm just trying to remember the last time that anything I was working on was close to what it was they were sending me. So you can be nice and you can accept it, but the music supervisor, they're the clearinghouse, and they're the ones that amass these huge libraries or these huge lists, and they know how to literally target by budget and everything else, and that's where they should go. I don't really accept them anymore.
Back in the day, though, like there was a time where I worked on a film and we were looking for some crazy music and there was some band playing in the subway. I'm like, oh, I bought their CD. I was like, this could work. But it was, even the music supervisor was having a problem finding the music. So there are some projects that you're just like, if you find something on the street outside and that could possibly work, you'll take it. Although it's very
But only use it if you know 100% that it is free and they will not, you know, that you can use it for free. That's the only way.
Oh
I
no,
mean,
you
even,
can't use it. You have to get the information. Like at that time, it was like
right.
I got their CD and I don't even think there was a music supervisor on yet. And it's like if you were going to use it, you have to hand it to the music supervisor and the music supervisor would have to deal. But like you get in big trouble for grabbing anything off YouTube. You can't take
Right,
anything
yeah.
off of YouTube. That's like the biggest no-no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
during our spotting sessions, a lot of times the music editor and the music supervisor will have to say, stop, is that what they're playing a video game? What is that? Is there music in that? Okay, where's it from? Okay, we can't use that. You know, it's like we have to be very attentive to that kind of thing and be very pay attention to detail.
But is there a real separation between like right now we're temping and then right now we're, you know, like, okay, we're done temping. Now we're only dropping in things that are going to be like officially used. Because I know you're saying like in the temping phase, you can grab whatever you want.
Yeah, in the temping phase, it's fine. But once you're like watching in the spotting, part of that is we know we're watching temp right now, but the spotting meeting is to talk about replacing it.
It also depends on literally when the composer starts and then you start going through the demo process of playing new demo cues for the composer. And then slowly but surely they start replacing the temp that's in there. But he's not able to get everything at the same time. So they're in the picture editor is still cutting, they're still reimagining some scenes, and some scenes are getting bigger and smaller and new stuff's put in that wasn't there before and stuff's been taken out. And then you have to still be able to present those scenes that just got put in the screening. So you might still be temping towards the very end, but very, very little. But it's like it's a long process, and the temping starts to peter out. I usually with me a couple of weeks before scoring, because that's really the drop dead, because the composer's got to come up with something that's going to work in all those places, and they all have to be accounted for. And then even then, when the composer is doing his thing and cues have been approved, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, director's like, this cue, you know, it doesn't
Right.
work at all. And you're like,
Yeah.
dude, you sat in
Yeah.
the room and we played
And you
this,
had
and
to
how much you
change
loved
it out
That's
on the
it.
mix. You're changing it out,
So you gotta
finding
change it.
something new.
Yeah, and then the
Yeah, this is
composer
actually
said, well, it's not working. The director says he doesn't like it now. The composer's like, damn it, we were in the room and he said
And
he
the-
loved it.
And the mixers are looking at you like, "Ugh," you know,
Yeah.
you have
And
to
I've
be like,
been
"Oh,
in
don't,
mix.
Dude, what
don't
is
worry,
this?
I have something. Don't worry."
I've been in mix situations like that too, or even we're just, you know, during the mix, they're like, okay, we're just trying to finish up this clearance. Okay, we didn't get clearance for this song, so we got to drop in something else. And you're on the mix stage waiting for the music editor to cut something new in. Or if you have a heads up on that, you might have something prepared. But I mean, I'm sure everyone's been in a situation where last minute, yeah.
I think Jolinda was talking about anticipation. And so you're anticipating that some of these cues are not going to last. And then some of them, composer loves the way the cue has been constructed and he created it. So, but you know, at some point it's not going to work. And you might have thought, yeah, the piano's just so sappy there. I know I'm going to pull that out when the chance comes. Or, you know, you might not be thinking about it at all, but sometimes you can anticipate that and then have stuff prepared just in case. And when you're on the dub stage and then this whole war starts, you can present them options. Anticipation.
Being prepared for every situation is a big part of it. Foresight.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why Pro Tools skills are important, because I know I've been on the dub stage as a music editor and watching music editors where you're in overtime and they're going, here's this new cue, you got to cut it. and everyone's waiting on you, and you're back in the room on your headphones cutting a track and sending it up to the mixer to mix, and it really is a lot. It can be a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and I will say, also coming down back to like, having your wanting to put your own music in or whatever, that I feel like having just a like objective, like just you're not taking it, it's not as personal if you're just a music editor doing what is best for the film, what is best for the show, and putting your own music or whatever, your friend's band or this or that, it's a conflict of interest as well. So you got to be like objective in the sense of, am I doing what is best for this film because that is my job, without having my own personal ego or whatever.
Absolutely, and that goes with the composer as well too. Sometimes that cue that he loves, the best thing, might be something totally in the opposite direction of where the director and picture editor and producers have wanted to go emotionally for that scene. And it happens a lot for us where we have to deal with these battles and find ways to communicate to them so that they don't totally lose it, because they are several times during the process and they're going to lose their patience. And who's in the middle? The music editor. The picture editor may hate the composer, the director loves the composer hates the picture editor, but you got to deal the most with the picture editor, and he's in your face. And sometimes that is our job, to somehow find a way to keep peace all the way to the end of the project, so that political thing is yeah, not to be taken for granted, because we get in those spots, and they pay us well for our creativity to be filmmaker, but they also pay us because we are going to be in that spot, and we're the ones that are supposed to be going and keep people grounded enough to finish the project.
And it's also cool when you get to save the day too.
Oh, love it.
It is cool.
Absolutely. Well, see, you said magic of the music supervisors, and then people are like, oh yeah, the music editor, he's going to do his magic. We don't know how he's going to do it. We don't, how does he do
Right.
that? How does she do that? How do they know how to do it? And you're like, they just use pitch and time, and I just did it. It's really simple. But, it's like, so, I mean, tell somebody that, but they still can't understand that intuitiveness that you had in you to know to make it. And even something as simple as, like I said, taking out that piano, or
if it's fighting dialogue, and maybe nobody saw that until we're on the mix stage, seeing it all within context of the way it's supposed to be, and you're like, maybe that piano is fighting dialogue, we need to take it down or take it out, and that is up to you to make that decision, because the composer is not there.
Or if you're feeling, you're hearing that the backgrounds all of a sudden got really high, and you're wondering, how come this cue is not emotional anymore? Everybody loved this cue, and now it's just flat. But then you realize that the backgrounds are really high, and you've lost the nuance, and that you can't hear the emotion of the strings undulating and moving and doing its thing, and you can't hear the ostinato, the beautiful, because the backgrounds are too high. That's not always saying that happens, but when you're in the mix, you always have to play that as the mix process is going down, and you're a shepherd of the music, and it's your job to make sure it goes down the best way possible for the film.
And it's not an easy job either, because you have to sometimes fight the mixer a little bit in it, or not fight, but it's definitely between the sound editor and the music editor when you have to raise music and lower a sound effect, or if like one effect is getting in the way of those strings, or the percussion is fighting with the effect. So it's also the sound editor and mixer too that you have to.
Yeah, I actually work really closely with my dialogue mixer on Diary right now. Like we actually work really closely together within our notes process. We'll do one playback, and we'll do all of our notes, and then we'll go back to give our notes to the mixers, and my mixer will say, oh yeah, now it's time for us to go in and do our little special moves. And it's because he knows all of my notes are move up the percussion right here, or take the violin down from here to here. Like, he knows my notes are just going to be little tiny little adjustments, and it's like the fun part that we get to do together. So I work very closely with my dialogue mixer to make sure nothing is fighting, and that everything has its space.
Yeah, and I think in general, it's like, even though it sounds like there's times that it's a battle, it's all in the interest of making the final product the best possible. And so these kinds of conversations happen very naturally. It's not necessarily a debate. It's more just like having a natural conversation about what's in the best interest of the music.
Exactly. It's not
Collaboration.
really a fight. It's all collaboration.
And sometimes maybe it's the best interest to drop the cue. Like, honestly, a lot of times we drop it and it's like, oh, so much better. So that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, if as a musician you say, you know what, we got to play the rest, because you're playing the
And
rest.
you're like,
you're
oh,
playing
the
that quiet.
yeah, and you're like, the actors are killing it. Why do we need music? Like, just
Yeah,
get rid of it.
get out of the way. Get out of the actors, and oftentimes too, you'll pull music out. Sometimes the music you play now or not play is going to affect how the next scene is going to feel. And
Right.
eventually you'll get that rhythm and intuition where you can feel that, where you can adjust something, adjust a cue before or after, or maybe even at towards the beginning there might be some love scene, and you're like, well, we want them to remember this later on in the film, so we want that theme to come back again at the end. It's kind of we're building this story in the music, so it's it's kind of linear, and it's a puzzle, but you're helping to create it, and you're helping to create this story, this which is a puzzle, but you want it to feel more like something that is organic in the end.
Yeah, I would say that the music is really helping to convey the story's emotion.
Totally. So I'd love to take our last few minutes and just, if there's anything that you guys can think of, like any advice you'd want to give, famous last words.
I would say don't give up and keep your relationships, all of them, because that's what will take you very far. And I'm still friends with pretty much all of my mentors, all of my colleagues. I check in with them, all the time. I try to maintain those relationships, and I would say that's the most important.
Keep listening to music. I would say just keep trying to find new music, up and coming composers, anything that is inspiring to you, to note for potential future projects. I think that's a really key thing.
Persistence.
As an up and comer, sometimes there's these making ofs, where they have these side notes where they talk to the director talks along what happened in the film, and he talks about his ideas and everything else, and if you're unsure about just the language that we use, sometimes you can use these, you can listen to a lot of these and start feeling how they feel about shows and how they approach things. Sometimes they're pompous and everything, but oftentimes the composer's talking too, and sometimes you can go to these screenings where they have Q&As and they talk about their experiences. That can be helpful sometimes. But I'd say the biggest thing for me is getting a mentor and listening to them, and being driven.
Yeah, also never like underestimate the power of asking questions, because I still call my mentors and I'm like, hey, what is that thing? And like, I still call and ask questions, and it's very, very helpful to just know that, hey, we're all doing this, you know, we're all in this thing and we're all going to help each other.
Sherry, I think you get the final. Uh-oh, unless she's frozen.
Do we lose Sherry?
Well, she comes back. We'll let her comment. But I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. And if we have further questions, you can reach out through Sound Girls. We can continue the conversation in the Sound Girls Facebook group. Oh, there's Sherry. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't know what happened. I just got kicked off. I just want to say, everyone, just be persistent. Don't be afraid to go for your dream, and you can, if you want to do it, you definitely can do it. It's so doable. I mean, I'm like a girl from Philadelphia that had no idea that you could even do this, and I just went for it and found it, and it's amazing. So I highly recommend it.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all for your time today. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
really nice to
thank
meet
you.
other music editors.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's so nice. We
So
should get together.
Yeah.
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 Do it again.
Thank you.
All right.